Welcome to my channel. Lena sat in the dimly lit living room, her fingers curled around a lukewarm cup of tea. The house was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock, a sound that had once felt comforting but now felt like a countdown to something inevitable. She glanced at the door, heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't expecting anyone. David, her husband, had left earlier that evening for a business trip. He'd kissed her cheek in a mechanical way, the kind that spoke of routine rather than affection. Their love, once filled with fire and whispered secrets, had cooled into something resembling duty. She had tried to ignore it, to justify it. But loneliness had a way of twisting reason, and she had stopped resisting temptation a long time ago. Faint vibration startled her. She pulled out her phone. Nathan. Outside. Her pulse quickened. Nathan was dangerous in the way that made her feel alive. He wasn't like David, predictable and restrained. With Nathan, the world felt different, riskier, sharper, full of stolen moments that burned under her skin long after they ended. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. It's too soon, she thought. Uncle Robert had been around a lot lately, his sharp gaze lingering on her just a little too long. He had never liked her, had never hidden his distrust. He was the kind of man who noticed details, things out of place, changes in routine. And lately, Lena had given him plenty to notice. A knock at the back door sent a chill racing down her spine. Not the front. Nathan knew better. Moving quickly, she unlatched it, pulling him inside. His hands were on her before the door even shut, his touch igniting something inside her that had been dormant for too long. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, but her body betrayed her, pressing closer. Nathan smirked, fingers tracing a path down her arm. "You say that every time." She exhaled sharply. He was right. And yet she never stopped him. A sudden noise outside made her stiffen. A step. Heavy. Deliberate. Lena tore herself from Nathan's grip, heart thudding. Someone's here. Nathan's eyes darkened. He stepped back, already searching for an exit. "David." She shook her head. "No, he's gone." But her breath hitched. "Uncle Robert." Another step. Closer. Then the unmistakable sound of the doorknob rattling. Lena's stomach twisted. If Robert walked in now, there would be no excuses, no explanations that could undo the truth. The weight of her choices pressed down on her, suffocating. "Go. Now," she hissed, pushing Nathan toward the hallway. He didn't argue. He moved like a shadow, disappearing down the corridor just as the front door creaked open. "Lena." Robert's voice was rough, edged with something unreadable. Lena turned, forcing a smile. "Uncle Robert. You scared me." His eyes swept over the room, pausing briefly on her flushed cheeks. The air between them thickened. Why was the back door unlocked? She swallowed, willing her voice to stay steady. "I was just letting some air in." It felt stuffy. Silence. Then slowly he nodded. But something in his expression told her he didn't believe her. Lena tightened her grip on her cup, feeling the warmth seep away. Robert's gaze lingered for a moment longer before he finally stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. She exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. Because in the distance, from the hallway where Nathan had disappeared, came the faintest creak of a floorboard. Robert's head snapped toward the sound. Lena's blood ran cold. The creak of the floorboard sent a chill down Lena's spine. She held her breath, pulse hammering in her throat. Robert's head turned sharply, his sharp, dark eyes narrowing toward the hallway. For one agonizing second, silence stretched between them. "Did you hear that?" he asked. His voice was calm, but his gaze carried an edge, like a blade testing the surface before cutting deeper. Lena forced a casual shrug, gripping her teacup to steady her shaking hands. "The house settles sometimes. You know how old it is." Robert didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. He scanned the dimly lit room, his expression unreadable. Lena could feel the weight of his scrutiny, the way he was searching for something. Out of place, out of the ordinary. Her mind raced. Was Nathan still inside? Had he managed to slip out unnoticed? She couldn't risk looking toward the hallway. Couldn't afford to let any flicker of her gaze betray her. Instead, she took a sip of her tea, the lukewarm liquid bitter on her tongue. "I wasn't expecting you tonight," she said, hoping to redirect his attention. "Did something happen?" Robert's gaze flicked back to her, but not before lingering just a fraction too long on the hallway entrance. "I was in the area," he said simply. "Thought I'd check in. Make sure everything's as it should be." The implication was clear. Lena forced a light laugh. "Everything's fine, Robert." Slow nod. Then, deliberately, he stepped past her and moved deeper into the house. Her stomach clenched. He wasn't leaving. He was searching. Lena set her cup down carefully, rising to her feet. "David isn't home, you know," she said, trailing after him. "I know." That single response sent a fresh wave of dread through her. Robert reached the hallway. He paused just before the entrance, standing perfectly still. Lena's breath locked in her chest. If Nathan was still back there, if he made one wrong move, it would all be over. Robert turned his head slightly, as if listening. Then, without warning, he took a step forward. Lena panicked. "Robert," she blurted, her voice a little too sharp, too sudden. He stopped. Slowly, he looked over his shoulder. "You didn't even take off your coat," she said quickly. "Stay for a while. I'll make you something warm to drink." Long pause. The hallway loomed behind him, dark and silent. Then finally he exhaled. "All right." Relief crashed through her, though she kept her expression neutral. As Robert turned away from the hallway, she forced herself to breathe again. "Whiskey?" she asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "Just a small one." Lena poured the drink with steady hands, but her heart still raced. Robert sat at the small wooden table, watching her like a man who had seen something he wasn't ready to name. She slid the glass toward him and took a seat opposite. "You and David been all right?" he asked, lifting the drink to his lips. Lena forced a small smile. "Of course. Why wouldn't we be?" Robert didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip, studying her over the rim of his glass. "David's a good man," he said finally. "I know. He deserves honesty." The words were soft, but they cut like a knife. Lena held his gaze, refusing to let her expression falter. "What are you trying to say, Robert?" He set the glass down. "Nothing," he said, but the way he said it told her he knew. Maybe not everything. Not yet. But enough. Lena's hands curled into fists beneath the table. Outside, the wind howled against the house. Somewhere in the back of the house, Nathan remained unseen, unheard. But for how long? Robert took another sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. Lena forced herself to smile. But deep down she knew, this was far from over. Lena sat rigidly at the kitchen table, her pulse drumming against her ribs as Robert's watchful gaze lingered. The whiskey in his glass swirled lazily, but his focus never wavered. Every second that passed was a battle to maintain her composure. Nathan was still somewhere in the house. If he so much as shifted the wrong way, if the floor creaked again, everything would unravel. Robert finally broke the silence. "David called me earlier," he said, voice measured. Lena's stomach tightened. "Oh." "He said he might be coming home sooner than expected." The words struck like a jolt of electricity. Her fingers clenched beneath the table. Was that a warning? Test. She forced an easy nod, careful not to show her unease. "That's good. He works too much as it is." Robert let out a low hum, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "And yet, I get the feeling you're not as thrilled as you should be." Lena's breath hitched. "What's that supposed to mean?" He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Just an observation." The air between them thickened, tension pressing in like a heavy fog. The kitchen felt smaller, suffocating. Lena had spent years perfecting the art of small talk, the delicate performance of a wife who had everything under control. But tonight, with Nathan lurking somewhere behind closed doors and Robert's piercing scrutiny, she felt dangerously exposed. She needed to get rid of him. "Do you want another drink?" she asked, rising to her feet before he could respond. Robert exhaled, shaking his head. "No, I should get going." Relief washed over her, though she masked it quickly. "All right, I'll walk you out." She moved ahead of him, heart racing as she reached for the door. Each second that passed was another opportunity for disaster. She needed him gone before Nathan made a mistake. But just as she pulled the door open, Robert hesitated. "Lena," he said, voice low. She turned slowly. "Yes." His expression was unreadable, but there was something unsettling in his gaze. "Be careful," he murmured. "Secrets have a way of slipping out when you least expect them." Her throat tightened. Robert held her gaze for a moment longer, then stepped outside. The door shut with a quiet click, and Lena remained frozen, listening to his footsteps fade into the night. Only when the sound was completely gone did she allow herself to breathe. Then she turned and hurried down the hall. "Nathan," she whispered harshly, opening the bedroom door. The room was empty. Panic seized her. Where was he? She checked the closet. Bathroom. Nothing. A noise from the back door made her spin around. She rushed toward it, hands shaking as she unlocked it and yanked it open. Nathan stood outside in the shadows, his face partially obscured by the dim porch light. "You idiot," she hissed, yanking him inside. "How did you get out?" He smirked. "Window in the guest room. You should probably lock those." Lena's knees nearly buckled from relief, but anger quickly replaced it. Robert knew something was off. "He's watching me." Nathan cupped her face, his touch igniting a familiar heat. "Then we just have to be smarter." She pulled away, shaking her head. "No, Nathan. This is getting too dangerous." His jaw tightened. "Are you saying you're done?" She hesitated. The logical answer was yes. The safe answer was yes. But as she looked at him, the wildness in his eyes, the reckless promise of something more than this stagnant life, she couldn't bring herself to say it. Instead she whispered, "I don't know." Nathan smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I guess we'll keep playing the game." Lena closed her eyes for a brief second, knowing she was standing at the edge of something she might never come back from. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a warning she refused to hear.